She didn't just lose control of the narrative, she lost the deal, the backing, and the illusion at the exact same moment the boycott wave hit, and suddenly, the silence from powerful partners became louder than anything she could leak.
Breaking today, Meghan Markle breaks her agreement with King Charles and Buckingham Palace to leak to her friends at People magazine less than a week after that promised meeting.
Everybody in the family now understands that Meghan is an adversary and needs to be treated as such.
Anybody who leaves their so-called loving partner to face the world's media alone when you've lost a mega court case is certainly not somebody standing by you. And you will also notice what was interesting, that even though they knew about the Emmy nomination.
On Harry's mind is Harry and Meghan, and on Meghan's mind is Meghan, but sometimes Harry.
Most definitely. Well, it's my view that she's pathologically transactional, and she's American. As you know, Americans don't like losers.
This confused and angry, spoiled brat can never admit he was wrong, can never admit that he's, done a terrible thing in bringing this entire losing case and wasting perhaps £50 million in legal costs.
Everything was supposed to stay locked down, controlled, calculated, carefully managed behind closed doors, because that had always been the strategy. Keep the doors shut, keep the conversations private, keep the leverage intact, but something snapped, something shifted, and within hours, not days, not weeks, the entire structure began to collapse in a way that felt too precise to be accidental and too fast to be contained. The moment the boycott wave started gaining traction, whispers turned into calls. Calls turned into internal panic. And somewhere inside those quiet boardrooms, a decision was made that would never be announced publicly, but everyone could feel it happening at the same time. The deal wasn't just under review. It was already gone.
Contravenes what Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had agreed with the palace, which was that there was to be no briefing around this visit to try and shape the narrative in favour of one party. But she can't help herself, can she? So this is the cover report where People says the Duchess planned to be by her husband's side for several outings.
Because what people didn't realize at first was that this wasn't just about headlines or public perception, it was about trust. And once that breaks at the highest level, nothing else holds. Not partnerships, not contracts, not carefully negotiated appearances that took months to secure. Meghan Markle had built everything on access, on narrative control, on being able to step into a room and walk out with influence still intact. But the moment that boycott number surged and the audience started rejecting the story instead of absorbing it, something fundamental cracked. The same outlets that once amplified everything suddenly hesitated. The same executives who once pushed forward, deals suddenly paused. And in that pause, the collapse quietly began.
Ian was very much across the meeting. He knew exactly why the king wanted to do it. He wasn't having any of it, not interested, but understood. And it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning about the monarchy, how you have to be careful because the king is the king is the king. You get the picture.
And what makes it even more unsettling is how predictable it all feels in hindsight, because William had already seen the pattern forming long before anyone else wanted to admit it. Watching the strategy unfold piece by piece, understanding that access wasn't being protected, it was being used, leveraged, and eventually exposed when King Charles stepped forward trying to stabilize everything, trying to create a moment of calm. It wasn't met with silence, it was met with movement behind the scenes that would echo far beyond one conversation. That's where the real shift happened, not in public, but in the quiet realization among decision makers that the risk had suddenly become too visible.
Of course he's going to say yes. He's a kind man, really, the king. He's not going to not want to see his grandchildren.
Okay, is he a weak man, though, Jobbo, too?
Yeah, but, it's difficult, isn't it? You're living with cancer. You've got a certain amount of finite time in your life. I mean, he's seeing all sorts of people behind the scenes. Michael Fawcett, who was got rid of as well. A lot of people being seen in this period, because of course a man without living with that he doesn't know how long he's got, and so he's not going to turn that down. And that may be seen as weakness, but it certainly wouldn't have happened on the Queen's watch. the late Queen's watch. And I don't think it would happen if it was Prince William.
Within that same narrow window, as the boycott wave grew louder, something else started unraveling in parallel. Something no press release would ever confirm, but every insider could feel tightening the alleged deal. With the one that had been positioned as the next major step, the next platform expansion, the next opportunity to regain narrative control, suddenly stopped moving forward. No dramatic cancellation announcement, no public fallout, just silence, delays, unanswered calls, and eventually the kind of distance that only happens when a decision has already been made behind closed doors. Because deals at that level don't collapse loudly, they disappear quietly. One meeting postponed, one email unanswered, one executive stepping back until the entire structure dissolves without ever officially existing anymore. And when that happens, at the exact same time a boycott is gaining momentum, it stops looking like coincidence and starts looking like cause and effect. Like the moment the public sentiment shifts, the business world follows. Not emotionally, but strategically. King Charles may have believed in repairing something that had already been strained beyond recognition, but the timing tells a different story, because while that door was being opened, somewhere else another one was closing, and it wasn't closing slowly. It was being sealed off completely. The alleged deal collapse didn't come after weeks of negotiation or gradual tension. It came right as the backlash reached a point where association itself became a liability, and in that moment, every calculation changed. And this is where everything connects in a way that feels impossible to ignore, because the same pattern keeps repeating. Private access turning into public narrative, controlled moments turning into exposed strategies, and each time it happens, the consequences move faster, hit harder, and leave less room to recover. What looked like a temporary backlash started behaving like something much bigger, something that didn't just question credibility, it challenged viability. And once that question is raised at the highest levels, the fallout doesn't wait. The numbers matter, the speed matters, the timing matters, but what matters most is the realization happening behind the scenes. Because when 1.5 million voices shift at once, it doesn't just create noise, it creates pressure. And that pressure forces decisions that would never be made under normal circumstances. That's when deals start collapsing, not because of one incident, but because of the accumulation of everything leading up to it. What nobody saw coming wasn't just the collapse itself, it was how quickly everything around it started reacting. Because once that alleged deal quietly disappeared, it triggered a chain reaction that exposed far more than anyone expected. And suddenly the conversation wasn't just about one fallout moment, it was about everything connected to it. Every partnership, every platform, every carefully positioned alliance that had been built on the assumption that control could always be maintained. Because behind the scenes, the financial questions didn't wait politely for answers, they started surfacing immediately. The moment confidence dipped, the moment the boycott wave proved that public sentiment could turn this sharply, this quickly, and when that happens, investors don't sit still. They start asking uncomfortable questions. They start reviewing numbers that were previously accepted without hesitation. They start looking at budgets, projections, commitments, and wondering if the foundation was ever as stable as it appeared. That's when the whispers about cost, about scale, about sustainability began to move from private conversations into wider awareness, and once that line is crossed, it doesn't go back. The alleged deal collapse wasn't just a single loss, it became a signal, a warning sign that something deeper was shifting. Because companies don't step back from opportunities without reason, they step back when risk outweighs reward, when association becomes uncertain, when the future looks unpredictable in a way that can't be managed with messaging alone. And that's exactly what started unfolding. One quiet withdrawal leading to another, one hesitation triggering more hesitation, until the momentum that once pushed everything forward began moving in reverse. At the same time, the industry itself started recalibrating in real time, because when a figure becomes polarizing at that scale, every connection becomes a calculation. Every appearance becomes a decision point. Every collaboration becomes a potential liability. And suddenly the same presence that once guaranteed attention now raises questions about impact, about reception, about whether the audience will engage or reject entirely. That shift doesn't happen slowly, it happens all at once. The moment enough people start seeing the same pattern at the same time. And then something even more telling began to surface, not in statements or announcements, performance. But in absence, because the expected appearances didn't happen, the expected confirmations didn't arrive, the expected support didn't materialize in the way it once would have, and in that absence, the reality became impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a temporary backlash, it was a structural shift, one that affects everything downstream, from media partnerships to long-term positioning, from future projects to existing commitments. The alleged collapse also forced a reevaluation of narrative itself, because the strategy that once worked so effectively, shaping perception, controlling the flow of information, guiding public interpretation, suddenly met resistance that couldn't be redirected or reframed. When the audience stops accepting the narrative, when they start questioning instead of consuming, the entire system breaks down, because it relies on participation, on belief, on engagement that can't be forced once trust is gone. At the same time, comparisons started emerging more clearly than ever, not through direct confrontation, but through contrast, because while one side struggled to maintain control of the narrative, the other side remained steady, consistent, almost untouched by the chaos unfolding around them, and that difference didn't need to be explained. It was visible, undeniable, and increasingly influential in shaping how everything was perceived moving forward. That contrast amplified the fallout, turning it from a single moment into a broader shift in perception that extended far beyond the original controversy. And then came the most difficult part to reverse, the change in how people respond, because once doubt sets in, once skepticism replaces acceptance, every future move is filtered through that lens. Every announcement is questioned. Every partnership is scrutinized. Every appearance is analyzed for intent rather than impact. That kind of shift doesn't fade quickly. It builds, it reinforces itself, it creates a cycle where each new development is interpreted in light of what came before, making recovery not just difficult, but uncertain. The alleged deal collapse wasn't just an endpoint, it was a turning point. The moment where everything that had been building quietly beneath the surface became visible all at once, where the consequences of repeated patterns converged into a single, undeniable outcome that couldn't be explained away or managed through strategy alone. And as the fallout continues to unfold in ways that aren't always immediately visible, but are deeply felt across the industry, the real question isn't whether this moment matters, it's how many more pieces have already shifted without being publicly acknowledged, how many more decisions have already been made behind closed doors, and how far this ripple effect will travel before it finally stops.